In chapter 4, you learn pretty much the fundamental elements of expository writing or explaining a concept. When I say expository writing, I simply mean any type of writing that simply explains something or exposes something. It's neutral, which means it's objective. It does not evaluate, analyze, or argue anything. It, again, simply exposes or explains something. Um, and again, keeps a neutral stance on whatever that is. And you would use expository writing pretty much anytime you want to, again, explain something. So if you are writing an argumentative essay and you need to explain a concept of some type, you would use these strategies. So when you write essay number 2, your entire essay is going to be neutral and objective because you're going to simply explain something. Hopefully this is starting to sound repetitive because that's all that really there is to this. You're just explaining. You're not arguing, defending, evaluating, analyzing anything. You're simply explaining. So you use explanatory or expository writing, excuse me, um, very frequently. You used it in your narrative essay. You'll use it in any argumentative essays you write now and in the future. Um, it's very basic. It's a very fundamental skill that you have. So again, essay 2 just really hones in on that and focuses only on that one skill. So what are the basic features of expository writing? Well, it's a focus explanation, so you need to make sure that you have a thesis statement. The thesis statement is what um, drives your explanation. What is the point you're trying to make about it? So as you write your own expository essay, make sure that it is thesis driven. Make sure that you establish that thesis in your introduction so that it ties all of the information together, because it does need to be focused. You're not just explaining, you know, the entirety of a concept. More than likely, whenever you do use expository writing, you're writing about one specific point about that concept. So that's where the thesis comes in. You want to make sure that you have a purpose and that you, again, just stay focused on one main point. Otherwise, your information is going to be all over the place, and that's not an effective explanation. Anytime you explain something, there's a purpose behind it. Are you trying to help somebody with directions to your house? Are you trying to explain a lesson to your children? So all explanatory and expository writing and communication has to have a point, and that's where your thesis comes in. Of course, organization is always important, but especially so with explaining. Again, it goes back to your purpose. What are you trying to accomplish, and how can you best organize the information in order to best achieve your purpose? Do you want to start with simple and move to more complex elements about your concept? Do you want to start with the complex and get easier? There's a variety of different ways that you can organize your ideas, but it does need to be logical, and it does need to be there needs to be a reason for your organization. Also, you need to use transitions well as you move from paragraph to paragraph, especially if the main points that you are bringing up about your concept are isolated in any way. If they say, for example, your thesis statement is a little more broad, so that the different points of your concept that you bring up in your body paragraphs are a little, not random, but just not as well connected naturally, you would then connect them through transitions, and that's going to help your organization as well. The chapter lists 6 different strategies for explaining, so make sure you take a look at those and make sure you utilize those in your paper. There's definition. How do you define something? How do you classify something? How can you group them together? That kind of goes back to the synthesis idea that was brought up in the reading strategies chapter. Classification and synthesis are similar. Can you compare and contrast? How are things similar and how are they different? Can you provide an example that demonstrates what you are trying to explain? Is there an illustration, especially with a visual, that helps you? And then the cause and the effect. What happens when something happens? What causes it, and what happens after that? So look at those strategies, make sure you have an understanding of them, and then think about how you can use 2 or 3 of them in your essay to really help with your explaining. And then the last aspect of expository writing that the textbook brings up is a use of sources and how to smoothly integrate them. This is extremely important information, but not for writing 60, not this quarter. That is something that I don't want to focus on this quarter because there's so much that goes into it. How to introduce a quote properly, how to quote, paraphrase, and summarize effectively, how to cite your sources with in-text citation and works cited pages. That's just too much. I would much rather you focus this quarter on learning how to effectively explain something without the added weight and pressure of using sources. So, this information is really good. Don't gloss over it, just ignore it. But for the sake of your essay, you're not going to be using outside sources at all. So, look it over. Look at how the samples integrate sources. And by all means, when you write your discussion board this week, do integrate sources. Quote from the reading that you're working with. There's no reason you can't do that. But when it comes to your essay, I don't want outside sources in your essay. So I would much rather you focus on the other features of effective expository writing. So in the second part, or I guess the latter part of the chapter, it gets into, actually crafting and drafting, an expository essay. So be sure that you really go through all of that information as you begin your own essay, because I think it's really helpful. It's pretty much a how-to guide on writing your paper. And if you ignore that information, your paper's not going to be as good as it could be. So if you have questions or concerns, go to that part of the textbook first. It starts on page 152, and that's all about how to write your own essay. So when it comes to choosing your topic, you want to make sure that it's something that you understand really, really well, especially without sources in this case. But even if you did have sources, it needs to be something that you understand. You can't explain something effectively if you don't understand it. You've got to grapple with the information before you can effectively communicate it to somebody else. So when you pick your topic, make sure it's something that you already understand. Don't make it harder on yourself than you need to. And remember, in this case, you can't use outside sources, so you have to know it very well. Also, think about if it's important and if it's interesting. If it's neither of those things, then you might want to pick a different topic. Also, it needs to be focused enough that you can cover it efficiently in 2 to 3 pages. So you don't want it to be too broad, because then you won't be able to give the detail that you need. So keep it pretty narrow. Make sure that it's big enough to write 2 to 3 pages about, but make sure it's no bigger than that. Research, again, get an overview of this information, I misread that. Get an overview for yourself. Use general information in your explanations, but don't use specific details, because that's when you'll be pulling in outside sources, and that's not what I want. Also, make sure that you're focused on one aspect of your concept. Goes back to your topic. You don't want to get too broad. You want to keep your information very specific. And remember, I don't want research or outside sources for this essay. Page 154 has a really good list on how to get started on your essay. So I really suggest that you take a look at that list, answer some of those questions either on paper as a form of pre-writing, or at least have some good answers in your head, but use that as you start drafting. Also, on page 155, it suggests that you create a working thesis. Well, what is a working thesis? A working thesis is a thesis that is able to morph and adapt as you write. So, for example, say you start with a thesis statement at the beginning of your drafting process. Sorry, my brain has totally gone blank. So you're starting with your thesis before you even begin writing. And then you begin writing. And you go back to your thesis and realize that, oh, the information that I provided is a little different from that thesis. All you have to do is adjust your thesis. That's called a working thesis. It moves and adapts and changes as you draft your essay. You don't have to have a nailed down concrete thesis statement at the beginning of your writing process. You want to have an idea of where you're going, but you also want the flexibility of adapting your thesis as your essay comes to life. Okay, so that's what working theses are. They just morph and change based on your drafting process, and then um, at the end, that's when you have your concrete thesis statement that you have in your final draft. So be open to your thesis changing if it needs to as your paper changes. Also, in that same area, there's a basic structure for your essay that I think would be very effective. You don't have to follow it, but you could. You start by engaging your reader's interest, include a thesis statement that says what the concept is and what your focus is, and then you can forecast the main topics if you like. You don't always have to forecast. We've covered that, the difference between a thesis statement and a forecasting statement, but you can. And then you provide the information in the body of your paper, organized by topic. So um, that I think that's a great way to organize your paper if you want to do that. Engagement, thesis, information. Also, I'm going to have you write an outline, just like with your narrative essay. So be sure to use outlining. Outlining is a means of getting your organization ready to go. And as you outline, if you think that, oh, my third paragraph would actually be better as the first paragraph, you can change things around. That is the beauty of outlining. You can see what your organization is doing and how it's working and how you can shift things around. And since you're outlining in a Word document, you can literally cut and paste things into a different spot. So always look at your organization objectively, sit back and think, I've got this point here and this point here, but that doesn't really make sense. If I move them, what would happen? Be really reflective about your writing when you outline. That's the whole point. Don't just vomit on paper and expect me to fix it for you. I can't do that. You have to look at your outline and figure out how you can improve it. I will give you what suggestions I can, but it always comes back to you. Be accountable for your own writing and your own work. That is how you will become a better writer. All right, and then lastly, on page 157, you will see another list of some strategies that you can use to explain your concept. Go through those, and again, just like with the other list, either mentally or actually write out these answers, and then you will have a good start to your paper. So that's pretty much the meat of this chapter. Be sure that you have the basic features down and that you understand what expository writing is. Again, it's simply explaining something, providing information to your reader, and then use that last part of the chapter about how to actually craft and draft your own essay as you work on your paper. That's the whole point of that portion of each chapter, is to help you write. It's pretty much a how-to on build that type of essay. So use it. Use the explanations and samples that they give, and and do your best to apply that to your own writing. So if you have any questions, as always, let me know. This is pretty straightforward, but it's a little tricky. It's hard to stay objective and keep yourself out of your writing and to simply explain without arguing or evaluating. So it might be more challenging than you think. So be ready for that challenge, and just let me know what I can do to help.